Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of Faith-Based Public Advocacy. My name is Heather, and I am the coordinator of Province 5. So on behalf of Province 5 and the Province 5 Executive Board, we are super ecstatic that you are here. It is my job to do the introduction piece of, hello, welcome, you are on Zoom. Lots of people are now familiar with Zoom, but for the record, please keep yourself muted until you have a question during the Q&A time. There is a speaker view right now, so the four primary speakers are on speaker view, and hopefully I'll keep up with the technology of that. And then also feel free to use the chat. And if you haven't used chat yet, along the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer, there's a little button that says chat. You can open that up. And some people have been introducing themselves there, so you can say hello to everyone, or use that for questions, or use that for feedback, whatever you'd like to do with that, related conversations as our time goes on. So again, thrilled that you are here. And also, I am thrilled to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Marcia Ledford, who is the convener of the Public Theology Network of Province 5. So thank you, Marcia, for being part of making this all happen, being the figurehead to putting this whole project together.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, Heather. So tonight we're going to have I think, a very special and unique opportunity to hear from two folks who have spent time abroad and are going to talk about their experiences viewing the United States through the lens of other localities around the globe. So who wants to go first? We didn't talk about that. Bishop or Father Ian, do either? Okay, so I'm gonna call on Father Ian then to get us started. And I'm gonna ask you to fill us in on how you came to be in the United Kingdom and a little bit about yourself as you make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia, and thank you, Heather, for this invitation. I am Father Ian Delinger. I am the rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church here in San Luis Obispo, California. We are halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco on Highway 101. It's a beautiful place to live and minister, and I am actually from kind of just down the road. My dad lives 35 miles away. And I was a layperson in this diocese before I went to seminary not sponsored by this diocese, in England, in Cambridge. And while I was at seminary in Cambridge, basically my seminary put me through the process, and I was ordained in the Diocese of Manchester in 2004 and priested in 2005. And I recently returned to California in 2016. Marcia, do you just want me to start?
Absolutely.
Great. I do naturally talk quite quickly, so keep up. But it is being recorded, and I'll be cognizant of that. And I kept adding stuff to my presentation, which just made it longer and longer and longer. One clarification, the views I'm about to express are based on my experiences and my reflection on them. I will be expressing some negative views about the English. This is not because I am anti-English. We are reflecting on our flaws as Americans, and some of the flaws of the English help us better understand or contextualize the flaws of Americans. This is not a comparative analysis or an implication that Americans are better or vice versa. And I would just like to say, I can't be anti-English. I have English friends. During a campaign event in Wisconsin over Labor Day weekend, Vice President Mike Pence said to supporters at the Dairyland Power Cooperative Energy Company, "I can tell you that after traveling to more than 30 countries as your vice president, America is respected in the world again." Most conscientious people, regardless of party affiliation, and particularly those who travel extensively, know that this is not true. The United States has spent most of this millennia being viewed as backward and misguided at best, to a laughingstock at worst. This was true even during the Obama years when people from other countries had high hopes that Obama would restore our nation to international leadership after the damage of George W. Bush's war on terror in particular. I lived in the UK for 14 and a half years. I was supposed to change my life and fly to seminary in Cambridge on September 11th, 2001. Every life in the United States was changed that day, and I flew to Britain on the first international flight from the West Coast a couple of days later. Apologies, the garbage truck has just pulled up outside my house. I completed seminary, was ordained, and served in a parish and then in a university before returning in 2016 to the diocese, where I had been a layperson, to serve a parish here on the central coast of California. I wouldn't say that I am well-traveled, but I have set foot on 4 other continents, which the vast majority of Americans cannot claim. I have friends with whom I still keep in contact on 5 other continents. In addition, you would be astonished at the network of Anglicans around the world, the places you end up in, and the people you can meet simply by being interested in Anglican things. I was also a steward at the Lambeth Conference in 1998 and a rapporteur at the 2008 Lambeth Conference. The international nature of this particular gathering probably rivals many prominent industry and academic conferences. These are the credentials and the limitations that I bring to my comments today. Living in the UK was challenging a lot of the time. You wouldn't know it as a visitor, but the educated classes are fairly anti-American. The media, including the BBC, is too. It takes time to figure this out, lots of time. It's very subtle most of the time. We think of the French not liking Americans. I admit this is a stereotype we have of the French, but consider that stereotype and apply it to the educated classes in Britain, particularly the English. By and large, the Celts, the Scottish, Irish, and Welsh, love the Americans, as do the working class. That dual observation is for another webinar. To the educated English, Americans are fat, crass, loud, racist, uneducated, less worldly, lacking culture, lacking history, and one that many of you have probably heard yourselves: Americans are stupid. And the educated classes in the United States play right into that. If you know any Englishmen and women, you have probably had a conversation about some aspect of American life, particularly social politics, and some form of, well, that's because Americans are stupid, is stated, and your response is, yeah, I know, isn't it sad? Try the reverse of that, and you may very well lose your friend. This is not a sentiment that can be reciprocated. Think about that email that went around in November and December of the year 2000. Can any of you guess what I'm about to refer to? It resurfaced as a meme on social media in November and December of 2016. Anyone? Well, let me share some of the text. To the citizens of the United States of America, from Her Sovereign Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In light of your immediate failure to financially manage yourselves, and also in recent years your tendency to elect incompetent presidents of the USA, and therefore not able to govern yourselves, we hereby give notice of revocation of your independence effective immediately. Her Sovereign Majesty Queen Elizabeth II will resume monarchical duties over all states, commonwealths, and territories, except Kansas, which she does not fancy. And it goes on. Whether written by an American or a Brit, it illustrates, albeit humorously, the general contempt that the English have for Americans. Personally, I don't think it's funny, and I think that it highlights the ignorance of both the Americans and the Brits who pass it around. I have lived in 3 states, none of which ever belonged to the British, something that gets lost in these conversations about the origins of our nation. It completely dismisses the Spanish, French, and Russian colonial past of what is now the United States, as well as the lands held by Mexico. It further denigrates the indigenous populations, and it suggests that Britain is somehow better politically and financially, which, even before Brexit, was not true. Just 2 examples of that is that both the UK and the US dwell at the bottom of OECD countries for primary and secondary education, and both have some of the widest income gaps in the world. The lack of understanding of the hurt in this humor draws out some of our own blinders, particularly on history and race, that outsiders definitely see in us. Americans also glamorize and romanticize the English, which makes this all worse. We love their period dramas and their frock flicks. We love their culture, their architecture, their monarchy, their accents. We believe them to be better educated and more sophisticated, and we tell them this. During the Diamond Jubilee celebrations and the royal wedding of William and Kate, the British news media would interview Americans who had spent their savings to fly over from Michigan, spend the night securing their spot on the Mall, not Mall, in hopes of catching a glimpse of royalty. What the American being interviewed or the American viewer doesn't know is that they aren't being interviewed out of a sense of gratitude for appreciating British culture. They are being mocked and scoffed in the subtle way in which only the British understand. Our deference to the English enables them to repeat with confidence, "We created you and we invented the English language, so use it properly." This is all part of being Americans being stupid. To make matters worse, we Americans, by and large, are willing to laugh at ourselves, particularly in media portrayals. Yes, we export movies about world destruction in which the Americans come to save the world. And yes, non-Americans like the films, but get tired of the proliferation of American triumphalism every Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day summer blockbuster release. But we also export movies like Bill and Ted, TV like My Name is Earl, and plays like The Book of Mormon. Britain, by and large, does not do that, and certainly other countries do not export negative portrayals of themselves either. Even today, the vast majority of exported media glamorizes the English lifestyle of every period in time. They export movies like Four Weddings and a Funeral, TV like Downton Abbey, and plays of Shakespeare. There are, of course, exceptions, but do the analysis in your own head. We therefore play into this assertion that Americans are stupid and ignorant and inferior to the British. The British more widely, and those in almost every country I have traveled to, have expressed their distaste for, dislike of, incredulity over, or confusion about the president, the electoral college, the lack of a comprehensive and cohesive healthcare system, our perceived lack of education, our criminal justice system, the politicization of abortion, our rampant racism, our political and economic imperialism, the homelessness crisis, our obesity, anti-vaxxers and anti-science, conservative evangelicals, our love of guns and gun violence, as seen both in the news and in the movies that we export, attitude towards homosexuality, our vacillating attitude toward climate change and our reliance on fossil fuels, the fact that few travel outside the United States, what we do to our food supply before we sell it to the general public, and even how our currency all looks the same and is confusing. The list goes on. And because the United States is so dominant on the world stage, those outside see us like this and have the confusion about this, both as individuals and as a nation in all things we do, whether it's global politics, global economics, or anything else. With regard to our governmental structures, let me offer 3 developments. The US Senate used to be considered one of the finest deliberative bodies in the world. That has significantly changed, particularly after at least a decade of blatant bipartisan antics culminating in the Republican Senate Majority Leader refusing to hold hearings for any judicial appointments of President Obama, and now the Republicans changing their own rules. The US Supreme Court was a model for the judiciaries of emergent democracies for over 200 years, until it clearly became an arm of whatever political party had the power to appoint new judges. And the US president was once considered the most influential and most powerful man in the world. I'll just leave that there. So why would people in far-flung lands mention these things to me in a trendy bar in their capital city, or in line at the grocery store, or at lunch break during a conference? Because the issues of the United States are part of every country's nightly news. Because of our political and economic imperialism, what we do is known by the average Joe and average Jane across the world because it's in their news. And this brings me to my experience of the rest of the world's perception of the United States while at Lambeth 2008. But first, an aside about the news. Both the British and American liberal elites complain that American news has no international content. That is not true. I was a BBC Radio 4 junkie when I lived in the UK, pretty much news and analysis 24/7, and the shipping forecasts that diehards stay up until 1 a.m. to listen to. Radio 4 includes news from around the world. It's not like BBC World. but the main global events we should be aware of. I now listen to NPR and have the New York Times webpage open all day. I feel no less aware of world events than I did while living in Britain. Two things about this, though. Firstly, some US media outlets do not carry many of the top international news stories or cover them in depth. And we have so many damn commercials in the evening news. And as many British will say, those media outlets only carry the stories that affect the United States. Secondly, about 1/3 to 1/2 of a half-hour British news program will be about the United States. When they come over here on vacation and turn on the news, if it's not the local news, which freaks them out about Americans being overly parochial, there is almost zero British news, unless it's Brexit, their handling of the pandemic, or the royal family. What they are really saying when they say that American news doesn't have any international stories is there's no British news. So even though Trump and Pence were not at the helm during my time in Britain, I can safely say that Pence's comment is overstated. And I'd like to see his travel manifest of those 30 countries because we know that this administration likes to spend time with leaders from autocratic countries rather than in free and fair democracies. I would be very suspect of respected around the world referring to autocratic leaders. Feedback I get from friends abroad now clearly indicate that America respected around the world again is highly inaccurate. Every single issue in that litany of topics that confuse people of other lands has gotten worse since 2016, and the rest of the world knows it because it's in their news. The 2008 Lambeth Conference. I had the enormous privilege to be a rapporteur. I was assigned to a group of bishops for all of their sessions over 2.5 weeks. I wasn't just a note taker. My job was to take notes and then issue a one-page summary of the session, which captured both the tone and the content. The summaries of all the groups of bishops were then consolidated by a small group of people into what eventually became the conference report. This position gave me an insider's view of how the Episcopal Church, the domestic and foreign missionary society of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America, is viewed by the peoples of other countries. First, let me say that the Episcopal Church is in several different countries. My Province 8 includes the Diocese of Taiwan. But on the international stage, when referring to TEC, the speaker is usually referring to the Anglicans in these United States. The Indaba group of bishops I was assigned to was comprised of 38 bishops from every continent bar Antarctica. 6 of them were from TEC, 2 in Province 2, 1 in Province 3, 2 in Province 6, and 1 in Province 8. The Indaba process was both inspired and something Christians are used to, storytelling. Each session was a different topic. The bishops were asked to share stories of their ministries related to that topic. Out of the storytelling emerged the political issues that the global church is struggling with. The model of previous Lambeth conferences was parliamentarian. Each issue was deliberated in small groups, usually by Anglican province, and then brought to the convention floor for debate, and a vote was taken. The conference report was a presentation of the resolutions and the outcomes of the votes. You can find an archive of all the resolutions on the Lambeth Conference website. So 2 statements summarized what the rest of the world thought of the United States at that time. This was 5 years after the consecration of an openly gay and partnered man as Bishop of New Hampshire, a momentous and long overdue act of inclusion and affirmation of the LGBT community into the body of Christ. The first of what would become a total of 14 Indaba sessions was entitled Celebrating Common Ground, the Bishop and Anglican Identity. They shared their stories of ministry specifically as an Anglican bishop. A bishop on the other side of the globe said with a plea, "Poverty and hunger are the most important issues my country faces. All of the churches must work together to help the poor, but now the other churches see me as a part of the gay church and we can no longer work with them." The room went silent. This would be the first of many times that the 6 bishops of the Episcopal Church and the 5 bishops of the Anglican Church in Canada would say through their tears, "I had no idea." In the session entitled Listening to God and Each Other, the Bishop and Human Sexuality, saved for the latter half of the conference so Indaba groups could form bonds before diving into the hard stuff, a bishop from a conservative African country offered this: "We get insults from other religions, which means homosexuals and Christians are being hated. Even if you want to practice homosexuality, nobody is worried. But don't climb the tree and say that everybody must do this. Think about your neighbor and how you are hurting that province. Can we find another way, a middle way? Keep our tradition quietly and not blowing it up on the BBC? Remember, our news is their news. He continued, Gene Robinson is going around the world and telling others how to interpret the Bible. Do it in your way, quietly, and let us do it in our way, and we can stay together. Then he said something that is very characteristic of Americans in every walk of life when we are working with those from other countries. He said, we say we are going to listen, but who is prepared to listen to the other? If you're thinking about us and that we're being heard, then do something about it. Other comments throughout the conference based on the attitudes and actions of Americans and of the Episcopal Church included huge impact locally upon ecumenical relationships which have ground to a halt, and if it means anything anymore. In the developing countries, there are issues of dominance of cash crops for export rather than crops for local food and lack of economic diversity. The provinces in minority contexts and in rapid growth contexts are seeing the Western provinces who brought Christianity to them dwindling, yet the Western provinces maintain the power in the communion. Issues around homosexuality coming out of the West have created problems in places where homosexuality was not previously a topic of conversation. Interfaith relations have broken down, particularly with Muslims, resulting in ridicule and Anglican Church being ostracized in some places. And finally, what I'm hearing is we want to walk together, but no one's going to change anything. So the Episcopal Church within the United States is very American. We are all Anglophiles and tend to think of ourselves as having a special English character. That may be true of our liturgy. It is not true of us as an institutional body or as individual ministries. The Episcopal Church is very American, and that is how the rest of the Anglican Communion perceives us. We are seen as rogue, we are seen as arrogant, we are seen as loud, we are seen as intrusive. All these have come together in the spokesman-in-chief and his acolyte, who has been to only 30 countries during his time in office. Pence's statement was way off the mark, but Amy McGrath, in her Kentucky senatorial debate against Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, brought the world's view of the United States into crystal clear view when she said, "This is the first time in a century, in 100 years, where we have a major international crisis where no one in the world is looking to the United States for leadership." What we have shown the rest of the world instead of leadership, we've shown the worst of America to ourselves and our fellow citizens during this pandemic. We've shown heavily armed white men protesting the wearing of masks accompanied by no police presence, yet a Black man is shot while jogging, and after 2 of the 3 men involved admitted to killing him, it took over 2 months to arrest them. We've shown widespread disregard for one another with large gatherings and political rallies during a pandemic. We've shown that we can't provide financial assistance to the American people, but we can prop up multinational companies. And the rest of the world knows this because our news is their news. And since today's webinar is to prepare Province 5 for a conversation about race, let me end with a few well-known incidents as a reminder of both how much work we as Americans have to do and the respect we have or don't have around the world. For good or for bad, across the globe, their news, our news, is their news, and this is what they know. When a presidential candidate referred to Mexicans as rapists and murderers, the rest of the world didn't not know about it. It was in their news. When a new president implemented a travel ban on 6 predominantly Muslim countries, the rest of the world didn't not know about it. It was in their news. When the racist language of the China virus circulated around the United States, the rest of the world did not know about it. It was in their news. And when a Black man suspected of passing a fake $20 bill is murdered by a police officer who kneels on his neck, the rest of the world didn't not know about it. The rest of the world didn't suddenly wonder whether there was a race problem in America. It was in their news. So what next? With this picture of how the United States and the Episcopal Church are viewed from abroad, how do we in the church take leadership in improving race relations with the understanding that the world is watching? Thank you.
You're muted, Marcia.
Wow. That was really packed with information. Thank you so much, Father Ian, for giving us your candid assessment, and at times was hard to hear, but I think that's partly why we thought that this session was so important, is to get a better reading on how we are being perceived across the globe, because we do wield such power and influence, and we are looked to for leadership. And I totally agree with you that there has not been leadership with respect to the pandemic in the United States. I didn't hear Senator McGrath say that, but that's really telling. So now we are going to turn to Bishop Sparks. And again, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and how you came to be in New Zealand and all of that, so that we have some context.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Father Ian. What a thorough observation of experience. And so thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty in that conversation. So quickly, I was serving in the Diocese of Milwaukee in 1996, and the assistant bishop of the Diocese of Wellington, Tom Brown is his name, called my bishop and wanted to come on his sabbatical to spend a week in our diocese learning about the catechumenal process. And I was the chairperson for the catechumenal process. So Bishop Roger White called me and said, I'm going to be out of the state for the time he's here. Would you and Dana, who's my wife, my spouse, he said, would you and Dana welcome Tom and Willis, and can they spend the week with you? So they spent the week with us. We got to know them well. And as Tom was leaving, he handed me his card and said, let's stay in touch electronically. So we would send emails for Christmas and Easter, just checking in. And I was getting ready for a sabbatical plan, and Dana has a family who live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so I sent Tom an email saying, do you think it might be possible to find a clergy person to come and spend a few months here in our home, and we could come there and do a clergy exchange? And so Tom wrote back and said, great idea, we'd love to have you. So on Easter Monday of 2002, I get an email from Tom saying, would you be interested in something a bit more permanent? And he then said that the dean of the cathedral in Wellington, the Wellington Cathedral of St. Paul, who was a Kiwi, he had announced his retirement after 17 years on Easter Day, and they were doing an international search. And Tom asked if I would be the North American candidate for their international search. And as you can appreciate, Dana and I were overwhelmed, thought, oh my gosh, what an opportunity. So we prayerfully considered it, talked to lots of people. It's also important to note that all of this prayer and conversation was going on while the Bush administration was moving sort of ahead with investigating weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And all of that was occurring as Dana and I and our three children, ages 11, 8, and 5, were making our way to consider going to Aotearoa, New Zealand. So we went, they invited us for a week for the search process. At the end of that time, they invited me to consider coming to serve. So we came back to the States, got our children and family ready to go, and we left and arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand on the 8th of January, 2003. And contrary to what some people may think, I had never used a New Zealand prayer book. I had no real sense of it, but there I was, sort of at at the Cathedral of right across the street from the Parliament building in Wellington. And I spent the first 3 weeks just getting to know the rhythm and experience of this culture and community that was completely new to me. As I said, we arrived, and within a few weeks, there were demonstrations going on right outside of the cathedral. There was an effigy of George W. Bush that was burnt right in front of the Parliament building in opposition to the decision that the United States was considering to make regarding the invasion of Iraq. I then was installed as the dean, and I spent the first month inviting religious leaders of all faiths to coming together at the cathedral in Wellington for a service of prayer. And it was the first time in the history of the cathedral that there'd been an interfaith gathering for these kinds of reasons and purposes. And at the same time, there were news articles written about the quote American dean who was newly installed as the dean of Wellington Cathedral. Things got really sort of challenging as the decision to invade was coming upon the world, really. And we were listening to the BBC World Service on a regular basis, as well as CNN International, and we were well aware of all of the other dynamics that were going on. At the same time, trying to keep a low profile. As you know, there were also bomb threats at the British embassy in Wellington. There were bomb threats as well at the American embassy in Wellington, and we had children who were known as the American children, the children of the American dean, and they were going to public schools or parochial schools. All of that was sort of swirling around for us as a family, and our desire was really to this may sound sort of naive, but Dana and I really said yes to this call because we wanted to experience another province in the Anglican Communion, and we made a commitment to sort of learning their culture and their experience. A little bit about the history of Aotearoa New Zealand. The 80s and 90s were the time when they rewrote the Constitution and declared themselves to be a bicultural nation. And I think it's also important to say, as Father Ian said earlier, there's an interesting love-hate relationship between persons in Aotearoa New Zealand and their relationship to the UK. Generationally speaking, if you were to ask some people where they were from, this was 16 years ago, so it's a bit dated. But if you ask people where they were from, persons who were 60 and older would say, "Oh, I'm from Wales," or "I'm from Scotland," or "I'm from England," or "I'm from Ireland," or "I'm from," and if you ask persons who were my age and younger generations, they would say, "I'm from New Zealand. This is my country. This is where I live." And the other thing to sort of highlight this is that for a country of 4.4 million people, the relationship between the Aotearoa New Zealand and the UK dramatically changed when all of a sudden the European Union and the trade relationships with other countries, New Zealand lost its sort of favored nation status and had to begin to develop relationships in the Pacific Rim, and their income just sort of bottomed out because they lost their most favored nation status in trading with the UK. Lamb, all of those kinds of things, wood, all of that changed dramatically. And at the same time, as you may recall, they were very focused on making sure that the nuclear weapons and any kind of nuclear power was not going to be allowed in their country. And as you know, during the Longy administration, who was prime minister, they basically declared Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a nuclear-free zone, and that was a real conflict with the United States at that point in time. Lastly, I'll say that in my own experience as a priest that had come from the Episcopal Church to leave this province and move and become a priest in the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Polynesia, there are people who would look, for example, to the United Kingdom as being the source of all good things liturgically, and wouldn't think about looking at the United States as a leader in any kind of liturgical way. And then there were other clergy who when they were looking for example, for advanced degrees in PhDs and theology and D-Mins, their first choice would be to look at the United States. So it was an interesting kind of conversation among clergy colleagues, because some people would sort of come into the conversation assuming that the Episcopal Church really had nothing to offer. And then there were others who said, oh no, I look to the Episcopal Church for this reason or that reason. And then the last thing I'll say, one of the discoveries that Dana and I came to appreciate that really made us citizens of the world and made our children citizens of the world in ways that we weren't, is that the indigenous community in Aotearoa, New Zealand are called the Maori, and they make up about 14% of the population. And part of the sort of lingering issues that we came to appreciate and observe are the very same kinds of issues around racism that we experience in the United States. And I remember there was a woman who, the Maori word for white-faced people is Pakeha. So Maori, Pakeha, and Pacifica are the three traditions within the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Polynesia. And she was a Pakeha woman, and she lived on a farm outside of Wellington. And she used to wait for she was a woman who's probably at that point, maybe in her late 50s, early 60s. And she would walk to the road and would wait for the school bus to pick her up in the 1960s. And there at the school bus, waiting for the school bus, were some Maori girls, and they would teach her various phrases in Maori. And she came home one evening and at the dinner table started sharing some of the Maori phrases, and her mother said, "You will never speak that language in our home ever, ever. That you're forbidden to use that language." Now, this was in the 1960s. Her husband, she and her husband then went to law school, and she remarked how in a generation, Maori became required language for all children in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Polynesia. Maori was required. So just like in many of our schools, we have English as required and Spanish or French, Maori was required for every young person going to school. And that was only a generation later. So that's an example of the kind of racial tension that lives, I think, there. And they're struggling to sort of deal with all of that. If I had more time, I would talk about the Treaty of Waitangi, because that has enormous impact on the relationship between Maori and Pakeha in government in Aotearoa, New Zealand today. But that's a longer conversation. And let me end by saying we ended up as a family dealing with a lot of stuff that was not necessarily our doing. We were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had Post-it notes put up on my door saying "Yankee, go home," and our children had some pretty horrendous things happen to them at school. And so after about a period of 18 months, Dana and I just said it's probably time for us to come back to the United States. But to this day, life in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Polynesia, and their culture and experience that I spent time learning some of the Maori language that's involved in the liturgical experience as part of a New Zealand prayer book. I learned and appreciated so much of the tradition, and I was the first dean to ever go to the Maori diocese's marae for a service which they call a hui, which is their convention. So I consider myself fortunate and in having this experience, and have come to appreciate the complexity of what it means to be an American and how people perceive us in other countries. And our experience is just with respect to Aotearoa, New Zealand, Polynesia. So thank you for the privilege of being able to share this.
Thank you so much, Bishop. This was really interesting, and it sounds like, you know, not only were you tested in terms of what perspectives you were seeing, but some of that animus was turned on you and your family. Yeah. So that is something to process. So I think what we'll do now is open this up to questions and conversation. So start putting things in the chat. We have a lot of people here, so I think that'll be the best way to do it. And Heather and I will watch what people are saying, and we'll pull some of this out. Okay. So go ahead and put your, I know, while we're waiting for people to get stuff typed in, I have a question, Bishop. So when you were experiencing this negative reaction to your presence there, how did that inform you about what it's like to be marginalized here? I mean, you're a white guy there. It's not something most white folks are used to here. So what was that like? How did you process that?
Well, one of the hardest things for us is that, again, I learned several phrases while we were living there, and one of the phrases that was shared with me is that a mother is only as happy as her saddest child. And we had our oldest is our daughter, and she was just moving into middle school, and you can imagine just the dynamics of girls in middle school. Our two youngest, our two sons, they would come home and report that someone in a prayer circle at their parochial school during the height of the beginning of the Iraq invasion prayed in the prayer circle that all the American invaders would be killed, that all the American soldiers would be killed. And so, you know, it's hard to figure out how to process that as a parent. When, you know, it's like, well, you know, we wanted to just fit in. We didn't want to stand out. We didn't want to draw any more attention than we needed to. And another example is Dana, my wife wanted to get some employment, and she had done, she was her degrees in communication, mass communication. She did television news, was a reporter, anchor, producer, and so she had an interview with a headhunter there, and he read over her interview, her resume, and said, one thing I want to tell you that you need to do is take every reference from any American city out of your resume, and if you think for 1 minute you're going to get an on-air position with your accent, you've got another thing coming.
Mm.
So we were like, wow, we didn't plan for this. We had no and we didn't really have a support system to sort of process it. Our closest friends were, thousands of miles away, and so it made us appreciate what, in a small way, how people make assumptions about you without ever checking out those assumptions at all. It's taught me a lot about checking my own assumptions that I make about other people without asking them or having a conversation.
And do you think that's a learning that you can really only acquire if you're immersed in it like you were?
Yes, I'll conclude with this. So I was installed and on a Thursday night in late January, and decided that I would preach and preside at all the services, which included choral evensong on Sunday evening, remembering that in January it's in the height of summer there, and so I preached and presided, and choral evensong was really a very popular service for persons throughout the city of Wellington. So I was standing at the cathedral on that Sunday after I'd been installed, shaking people's hands, and people were being kind, and a woman walked up to me and she said, "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Dean. I hope in a year's time you'll have lost that accent." and I was like, wow, I remember presiding and preaching, but particularly presiding, and Ian may have some of the same kind of experience. I remember presiding at the Eucharist and realizing that we were praying the Lord's Prayer together, and realizing how the same prayer sounds so very different given accents and language. And I realized, gosh, I am from the outside. I'm not part of this culture, and I need to learn that. I need to be appreciative of that. So experience.
Very, very interesting. Father Ian, Kitty Jensen mentions here that she and her husband Alan traveled in Asia and noticed that people were fearful about, say, what was happening in the U.S. and really thought Hillary Clinton would win, and she didn't. And so, did you experience a sense of fear about what's going on here when you were in the UK? Like they were worried how that was going to affect them, because they're much more aware of our news, as you've stated.
Well, I left in mid-April of 2016.
Oh, okay.
So Donald Trump was just gaining steam, and it was more it was more kind of like astonishment and explain this to me, and what do you think is going to happen? And at my going away party, which was an all-day pub crawl, I had guidelines for the party, and one of them was there no conversations about the presidential election. Because that's all they wanted to do is talk about that. And but if you jump backwards 14 years, there was fearful anger, resentment that America all supported Bush, all supported the war on terror, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and everybody, and Americans drug the UK into it.
Oh,
And that went on. I had people actively be nasty to me when they heard my accent, from 2002 till about 2000. I would say, well, all the way through my curacy, so up to 2008. Yeah.
so they blamed you for the UK's participation in the Iraqi
Yeah.
conflict. Okay.
Yeah. I would have to remind them, well, Bush got the data from, the key piece of data from Tony Blair, and that the UK is a sovereign nation.
Yeah.
And, being put on the defensive a lot.
Yeah.
Those
What talk about what that felt like?
It was really it was pretty awful. I mean, I have one story. It was when I was still in Cambridge. I was in line at the grocery store, and the checker started checking out my stuff at the grocery store, and I said something, and he looked up at me. He said, "Oh man, what about that president you have?" This is I'm a random person coming through the grocery store, and so the actions of the United States and all sorts of things. Again, Lehman Brothers, right? Lehman Brothers. We should have had the world of banking should have been warned when a small bank from the northeast of England went belly up about 6 months before Lehman Brothers crashed, right? But they didn't. And so the whole global recession was blamed on the United States, and it wasn't the United States as a distant entity. You caused this crash, so that wasn't good either.
Yeah, I would imagine. At times that was very trying. And for me, I think probably what would get my ire up a little bit when people start doing that is to say, look, I think the presumption is that we all love the Republican Party and we all wanted Bush to be president and we all want Trump to be president. And for me, that's absolutely not true. It's like, is there this sense that we're, kind of one dimensional with respect to our party politics, and everybody is just enthusiastic for whoever gets elected?
Well, there is a dynamic that happens everywhere, is that we look at other cultures as monocultural, and it's really interesting because I have challenged people on that when they'd say something like, I just traveled to Vermont and had this food item that's famous for Vermont. How could you not know what it is? I'm like, because I live 4,000 miles from Vermont, and
right.
There is this, the British have made the American person into basically all of us are like on Friends. It's a complete monoculture, but we do the same thing. We think of the British all of the same. We think the French all the same, and it's true for every country. But it makes it difficult when you live there to untangle that and say, actually, Bush didn't win the popular vote, and the polls coming out of the U.S. show that there's far less than 50% support for the war, but they don't want to hear that. It's America's fault.
Right. Well, and it's also our fault for having this crazy electoral college and all of that. I'm sure that sounds very strange to people, because I think a lot of us get frustrated with it as well. There's a comment from Jim Lozer mentioning something about living outside of the U.S. for a year or so. It changes your perspective. Do you have an experience like that, Jim? Are you there? Jim Lozer? Okay, we'll move on.
Nancy has a question and Natalie has something to say.
Yeah, let's see here. How can we heal and repair our reputation around the world? Well, that's a big question. Who wants to take a stab at that?
So last year, I had the opportunity to participate in the Canterbury course for bishops that has been held, I think, maybe since the early 2000s. I don't know how long it's been in place, but one of the benefits of having the College for Bishops here in the Episcopal Church have bishops from other provinces. Three of the bishops in my class are the suffragan bishops from Toronto. And so we were talking, and several of them suggested that I consider going to the Canterbury course. So I applied and made my way to the UK. I'd been to Iona, but I'd never been to England. And so I made my way. Our youngest son and I took a week's vacation, and it was just fantastic. We enjoyed the time. And then he got on the plane to come back to the States, and I headed to Canterbury on the train. And when I arrived, there were 29 of us, and there we represented 17 different nations. And my table group had a woman bishop from Brazil, Amazonia, and then a bishop from Vanuatu, a bishop from Japan, and a bishop from Madagascar. And I was the only bishop from Tech, and there were two bishops from the Anglican Church in Canada, and one bishop from the Church of Scotland, the Scottish Episcopal Church, and then one bishop from Aotearoa, New Zealand, Polynesia, and two bishops from Australia. And the rest were all from, the majority were all from various countries in Africa. And those days of Bible study and prayer and conversation, I entered into that time really wanting to be a learner. Tell me about your experience and about your context. And those conversations over a period of 11 days, we had insights that only can come from those kinds of conversations. And, I did my best to sort of represent my particular perspective on things, and out of respect, also trying to listen to other people's perspective. And I think relationships are the way that those kinds of those kinds of hurts and wounds can come to some kind of healing. A conversation by conversation, really. That's my own experience.
Okay, Father Ian, you wanted to say something?
Sure, and I do think the relationships matter, and I do take Betty's comments very seriously. We can't solve it all, but we can do our part. And I think it would be an interesting experiment to have ERD run our international relations for the Episcopal Church, because as the bishop said, it's about building relationships. And from my understanding of ERD, where they do work, they partner with people who are part of that culture and know what they're doing, rather than coming in and imposing. And Americans, for however long, we are very good at going in and saying, we're going to do it this way. And what other people don't know, and I've talked to my brother who's worked overseas, my best friend works overseas extensively, all while I was overseas. What other cultures don't know is that most Americans in leadership positions who come to a project and say, let's do it this way, we are welcomed, we will welcome, well, yeah, that's a good way, but how about we do this as well? Or how about we modify it to do that? And that's gotten me in trouble and my friends in trouble many times, because we're just used to saying, okay, let's paint the wall red. And everybody going, oh, well, I guess that's what we're gonna do. Instead of saying, I like red, but maybe red's a little bit too brash. We know that red doesn't work well with kids. Can we go with a softer color? You know, and so we never get pushback on the international stage, even though most of us would be okay with the pushback. And it's probably because our government doesn't accept pushback. I mean, any administration doesn't accept pushback on the international stage, but that's not really answering the question. But I do think we could work in a more collaborative way, and a more listening way. We're not really good at listening to other cultures. We're very good at gawking at other cultures, and I can't remember what the term is, but we were very voyeuristic when we go other places. That's the word I'm looking for. But we don't tend to let other cultures lead, whether that's at an international conference or doing something like a mission project or whatever. So we kind of have to get over our savior complex as the church, and that's why I use ERD as an example, because I know they do it differently than Americans are used to doing it.
It's very interesting. I call this Yankee Doodleism, when we just assume, you know, whether it's in the United States or outside, there's just this this attitude that we're the ones that know what to do. And when we do ministry, say in an urban environment, for lack of a better example, you know, the presumption is for us to go in there and tell everybody how we're going to do it, instead of working alongside folks that are working for positive social change. And so it is a habit that is hard to break. But I do think we need to be a lot more aware of it. And I want to ask a question of Mr. Brownridge. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. You mentioned something about you traveled to South Africa, and as an African American, you were hearing comments and whatnot, but you tried not to be defensive. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, it was actually more than that. About the same time that the bishop was serving in New Zealand as dean, I was serving as a canon at the Cathedral in Cape Town. I lived there 3 years with my family, 2 children, my wife. And then when I came back to the US, I served at Sewanee as associate dean at the School of Theology, and taught mission and would bring students back. So for several years. So I still have, you know, Cape Town is like still a second home.
Sure.
For me. And, you know, so the 3 things I think we did, and I just want to, I really appreciate what both the bishop and Father Ian said. My view is ERD is really good. I served on a committee for ERD several years ago, but actually our Episcopal Church, quote unquote, appointed missionaries don't do it like the sort of the big-footed American anymore. In fact, you wouldn't even get appointed to do that. It's a requirement that you actually go through several weeks of cross-cultural training. And really the attitude is, I'm not coming there to save you. I'm coming alongside to learn and serve. And everyone, and I'm very involved with the mission-oriented community, every one of them will tell you they gained so much more than they contributed. But I would, and so that's just, so that was like the first thing, that we already had a sense of humility. And it was, you know, we arrived, I visited in March to interview, and then we arrived in August. So the war in Iraq was full on. I had to preach the Sunday after the Abu Ghraib pictures were on the front page of every newspaper in South Africa and around the world. But I think that as a Black person serving in a predominantly, a very multiracial of, yes, white European descended people, Bantu African, so-called colored as well, you know, depending on the age, they would say they're Black or not. You know, my posture as an African American who was not defensive, who had an attitude of humility. They knew how I voted, because when I would go to a place that they did not know me, like a public gathering, I would say, yeah, my accent tells you I'm not from Manenberg or Bonteville, you know, a particular township or neighborhood. So yes, I am an American. And then and it's the only time I've ever done this, but no, I did not vote for George Bush. So, you know, and that would actually, with a bit of humor, ease people. But I'd also, that's a very important thing in the way we engage in the world. And I just think that what Ian said about at least the English in the context of other British folk is very true and interesting to me, because in some of my other work in the church, I've had quite a bit of exchanges with Church of England clergy and folk that that paternalism, but also they're actually, for me as a Black person, they're actually quite defensive about race as well. And they may want to, in some level, want to try to show me how they're quote unquote not racist, which of course puts up my antenna anyway. But I do think that even as a Black person from America, I did have to learn. I think our greatest challenge is actually our sense of American exceptionalism. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in a cafe with my dog, who's still alive. We got our dog in South Africa, and she's now 16 years old and still with us. But I'm sitting at this outdoor coffee cafe, my favorite hangout near where I lived, and got into a conversation with a journalist, South African journalist, who had traveled a lot around the world. And he made the comment that I would not disagree. Every American that he has met has a more hyper sense of love for their country than other people from other nations do. And, you know, I've spent 10 plus years pondering that as to why is that? And I think it is our exceptionalism, our sense of that we are exceptional, which then makes it harder to be self-critical.
Oh, yes.
I do think that Christianity is supposed to break that down. And if we, you know, and so if we take it with that approach, our congregations may not like to hear it, but that's what I think helps us in that context. I'll stop talking. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's a fascinating insight. So we have about 5 minutes left. So I guess what I would like to do is, anybody have a question, Heather, that I've missed?
Looks like Charles Baker just posted one.
Okay, where's Charles here? This is a nice question. From Charles Baker, is there a different sense of individual versus communal responsibility in your foreign placements as compared to your domestic experiences? Very good question. Yes, Bishop, please.
So I was going to conclude with this. One of the examples that came to be part of my own experience was got lived out when I was elected to serve as the bishop here in Northern Indiana, in preparation for the ordination service. In a New Zealand prayer book, it's their custom to have persons from the community that's sending you to participate in offering a mihi, which is saying something about the community that has sent this individual to this new place, and so I've adopted that. And so I had representatives from the communities I'd served, even a family that we're still very, very close to, who flew from Aotearoa, New Zealand, to be part of the ordination service, and their assumption is that that community helped to form me as a clergy person, and so they're there to say God's blessings on this new ministry, which is a very different kind of way of understanding relationships compared to kind of an individual. You know, I'm here on my own. I got called to serve here. So that's an example, I think, of the an awareness that I became very much appreciative of.
Mm-hmm. Father Ian, you want to chime in on that?
Very, very different. The community-minded versus communal-minded versus individual, like they express themselves differently in different ways. There's every time we try to make a comparison between the English and the Americans, we go like this, and then like this, and it's really interesting because the things just don't match up. Like, one of the things I really love is that all of the deacons are ordained in the mother church of their diocese together, and all of the priests are ordained together, at least by deanery, unless you are ordained by a flying bishop because you don't like women's ministry. That's a whole different story. But everyone's done together, and but the parishes are these little. When I say little, I mean little, like 1 square mile. If you're in a city, they are these little kingdoms, and there is very little collegiality. I was in a deanery with, I think, a total of 13 churches, and one deanery meeting, one clergy deanery chapter meeting, out of, I don't know, 20 active clergy, including rectors and curates and church and army officers and the like. There were 3. And 2 of them were from my parish, me, the curate, and the church army officer, because he was responsible for the building that it was hosted, and the area dean. That was all. And we looked at each other and it's like, what's wrong? I since had 2 bishops in my diocese say that our deanery was the most dysfunctional deanery in the diocese. But there is that sense of kingdom. The next deanery that I was in when I was a university chaplain, we all got along, including for a while the very conservative evangelical and the conservative Catholic, until it was very clear that there were going to be women bishops. The conservative Catholic and the conservative evangelical then stopped coming to chapter.
Mm-hmm.
But we got along. I did all of their weddings and their Sunday services in August when they would all be on vacation and things like that. But coming back here, I spent the first day of clergy conference super defensive. Like, I was super tense and I didn't know why. And the next day I realized I don't have to be defensive. I'm being welcomed and seen for who I am as an equal among all of these people, which was not true of my experience in England.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I remember going to my bishop and just saying, just in tears, just saying, I'm being accepted. And I am an exceptional deanery here as well. There are seven clergy with cure who in small rural coastal area, and we all get along and we all just try to get through this together. So it kind of bears itself out a lot differently. And I don't know if that's what Charles was looking for, but there you go.
Heather?
Natalie Alexander.
Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to make, hello. I wanted to make a joke earlier on in the session, but I think I will say right now that aspect of listening and not going in with arrogant presumption that we know what is the right thing to do is central. Mm-hmm. And I lived in England. My parents were Anglophiles. They were both English English professors. I'm a philosophy professor. And I share so many of Father Ian Delinger's positive and negative things to say about the English. And then here is the joke. Here is my notion. And I will say, I have not been out of the country for many decades now. But as a child, I lived in England 3 different times in London. I lived in Paris for 5 months. I lived in a tiny farm outside of, well, in County Kildare in Ireland, working on a farm for 11 months. No, not 11. I'm sorry, 5 months. So even as a kid or a teenager, some of those experiences came through to me. My family, by the way, was Church of Ireland. So I went to church with them and I was allowed to take communion because they weren't Catholic. Okay, but here is my half a joke if you must hear it. Here is the United States for most international people. New York City, Disney World, Disneyland, Hollywood. No people, just trees up there. And this vast middle distance, I'm from Province 6, so where and from Wisconsin originally, this vast middle distance where we live, and that is full of gangsters and Indians. I'm sorry, it was meant to be funny. I'm not getting laughs, so I'm sorry if I have offended.
No, that's okay. So we are past our time now. Does anybody want to add anything else in before I pray us out of here?
Pray us.
Okay. I would just like to say before we end that this has been an amazing experience for me to hear from all of you and get ideas about how we can better serve you in future webinars. And so thank you to all of you who have been a part of this, whether you listened to a recording afterwards or you were able to sit with us for some or all of the presentations. Thank you so much to Bishop Sparks and to Father Ian for your wonderful presentations. I thought they spurred a lot of thought and excellent conversation. Great questions. And so I just bid you all blessings. It's been an honor to be a part of this. So let's see here. Why don't we have a little bit of prayer? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Almighty God, whose will for us is harmony and justice, give us the gift of fair and peaceful elections. Keep our poll workers safe, alert, and attentive. Bring serenity to every polling place and voting line. Grant our clerks and government officials clarity and accuracy in counting ballots. Give us patience as races and results are determined, and help every voter realize the gift of democracy, the privilege of voting, and our responsibility in determining our destiny, that we may truly be one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Blessings to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. The closing pieces of details, you will receive an email follow-up for tomorrow. The survey for tonight is in the chat. Please do fill out the surveys to help us. And in the email, it will also remind you that there is a public theology meeting, network meeting on Thursday. And that will be the time where the network has some conversation about what are we going to do next. So we had this mini series. What are the pieces that we'd like to do next? And so please join into that or shoot Marcia an email if you have ideas or questions.
Yes, and the best way to do that is to do the survey.
There you go. Do the survey. Let us know. But that conversation, that network. So great.
Usually, yeah. Will we get the survey? Will it be emailed to us, or should we just?
The link is in the chat box right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Charles.
It will also be emailed to you. It will also be up on the web page. There is a dedicated web page that will stay up. I call it like the resource page for the mini series, and that will stay up as a as an archive of our time together. So it has all the links, it has all the recordings, it has all the surveys, it has all the slides, it has all the pieces that have happened with this mini series.
Right.
In the email, I also invite you to check out all of the other networks that are available through Province 5. So you can see the other networks and share with your ministry partners and your friends. Hey, here are some networks that are happening. Tomorrow is the Dismantling Racism Network. So that meeting will be tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central. So you can find out about that. Province5.org, province5.org, if you would like details on that. Or let me know after I stop recording if you'd like those details. So that's some things to check out. You will not receive, multiple emails in a week from me after this. But again, thanks for being here. Marcia.
I just wanted to interject very quickly. I think it went out last Friday. We sent an action alert. So for clergy and lay people who are interested in being poll chaplains, or if you are an attorney, to be an election protection attorney, there's lots of resources through the Episcopal Church and an organization sponsored by Sojourners called Lawyers and Collars. And I urge you to check that out to find out how you can be of assistance for next Tuesday. Thank you.
Fabulous. Great, thank you. If you have questions, comments, concerns, I'm going to hit stop now. Thanks for being here, but feel free to stick around if you have questions.